Hi, I'm Dixie, and if you watched my video from the beginning of this year, you will remember this fabric, which is actually an Ikea duvet cover. You might also remember it from the beginning of this video. I bought this duvet cover about 2 years ago because I wanted a historically adequate cotton print for the 18th century, and Ikea is known for doing reprints of original designs. However, the only suitable options Ikea had at the time in stock were black and white, and I was dead set on using a multicolored print. But then I saw someone online had used fabric markers to color this specific Ikea print, and I thought that would be a good idea until I tried doing it, and it was not a good idea. By the time I stopped coloring, I had a big blob-shaped colored section on one side of the duvet, kind of in this shape. It wasn't enough to make a gown, maybe enough to do a jacket, but I knew I was way in over my head, so I got an entirely new duvet set and made this gown instead. So now, 2 years later, we are back to this fabric because I am tired of it sitting in my room, and I probably had enough uncolored fabric to make something out of it. And since I've had the Scroop Amalia Jacket pattern in my collection since the day it was released, I thought now would be a good time to make a jacket and matching petticoat combo. I printed and assembled the jacket pattern, but set it aside and started on the skirt first because the petticoat takes up the most fabric, and I can squeeze out the jacket pieces from scraps. This is a queen size duvet, which is double-sided, so I had to split it apart. I didn't use a pattern for the petticoat, just measurements, and to help me get the right shape in the back, I used my new bum pad. This was made using the free Scroop Francis rump pattern. Just a small, easy project I made off screen because sometimes it's nice to make things without needing to film the process. I was able to make the petticoat out of about 1/2 of the duvet with some extra left over. I machine sewed the structural seams because you don't see them on the outside, but believe me, I still did miles and miles of hand sewing on this project. Since skirts in this era were leveled at the waist and not the hem, I went ahead and hemmed the bottom edge. I did a rough pleating of the waistline, and sorry for the crummy angle, but you've seen me eyeball pleats before, and you've also probably heard me complain about how much I dislike doing pleats. Moving on, the skirt gets tweaked on the dress form, and I tried my best to level out the hem. Obviously, the skirt needs to be longer in the back to go over that big old rump. Finally, I used my trusty cotton twill tape to create the waist ties. And if you think this petticoat was pretty easy, it was. Petticoats from this time were simple and mostly rectangles, and I have made several over the years, but don't you worry, it gets way harder from here on out. Because I can't simply follow a perfectly good pattern like a normal person, I decided I wanted to do a slightly different design for the front of my jacket. I cut out all the back pieces as is because that part stayed the same. But for the front, I was inspired by a few extant 1770s Caracos, which, do you ever see a new word written down and you read it wrong the first time, and then for the rest of your life, you think it's pronounced one way when you know that's not correct? Because when I first saw the word Caraco, or Caraco, I've even heard it pronounced, which is a type of 18th century jacket, I read it as Curacao, like Curacao, the Caribbean island. But it is not that. It is Caraco. And now every time I see the word, I have to remind myself, no, say it right. Anyway, I liked the continuous trimming around the skirt and up the front and around the neck of these jackets, but to do that, you need a stomacher. The stomacher was going out of fashion by the late 1770s, and the Amalia jacket pattern is based on 1775 through 1780s and has a center front closure, meaning I'd need to convert the pattern if I wanted it to match the extants. I tried on a mock-up made of muslin from just the lining pieces, and I marked where I wanted the opening of the jacket to sit. The back fit fine, but I did need to shorten the side front a little bit, as well as change the angle on the shoulder strap. I wanted to match the folded robing style of this extant from the Met Museum, but I kept procrastinating the draping process because I had a lot of non-sewing related things going on in my real life, and trying to come up with a design on my own was giving me a headache. My main problem was I couldn't decipher how this shoulder fold thing was supposed to work, because that fold didn't seem to continue all the way down the front of the bodice like a 1760s robing style would do. Could I have just ditched that part and tacked on some trim? Sure, but I wanted it to look like the extant. But around this time I was feeling pretty stressed out about life in general, so I put the whole thing aside and instead worked on literally anything else, like making this cute little heart-shaped pincushion, or this bow made out of scrap silk, or sewing a shirt for my kid, or getting some of my favorite costume photos printed for posterity, or setting up my new printer. And then real life got even worse, and I put everything else aside. We had to go out of town for a week, but when I got back, I finally felt ready to tackle this project. Luckily, I had good sense enough to clean my sewing room before leaving, so I could jump right back into where I'd left off. And I decided to shift to working on the back of the jacket and rethink the front design later. I prepped the edges of my cotton lining and sewed the interior seams of the jacket by machine. There are several skirt seams that are unlined, so I flat felled those by hand. Then the outer back pieces get layered and pleated on top of the lining and sewn down by hand. This is the main construction difference between my last 18th century outfit. In my Italian gown, the back isn't stitched to the lining along the seams, and this makes the back a little bit loose and shifty. I definitely wanted to do this part of the jacket the more historically accurate way because of that.
All right, it's getting late, but the back is pretty much done. And I've got all my pleats. These were quite complicated. I have to tack down all of the pleats on the interior. It's partially done, but you can barely see those little prick stitches. Next, I have another piece that goes right here, and then I can do the front.
While taking a break, I considered how to proceed with the front design. I ditched my original idea of the folded robings topped with trim and instead went with the original zone front style from the Amalia pattern. That means no more stomacher and instead a center front closure, but it meant less mental work for me, and at this point I was like 3 months into this thing and I just wanted it to be done. I took inspiration from this cotton jacket and skirt combo. I liked the trim on the skirt and the sleeves, which resembles my original inspo extant, but instead of trim along the front waist, I wanted to extend the trim up along the zone seam line and around the neck, kind of like this.
It is now 2 days later, and I have finished the side panels and the interior waistline like I needed to do. However, since then I have been procrastinating because at this point I need to try the whole thing on with my shift and my stays and all my petticoats, which means getting all dressed up just to make sure that the front of this jacket fits properly on my body, because the trim has to match up perfectly. And I can't do anything else. I can't attach the sleeves. I can't cut any trim until I try it on and match the front. What? Where is it? Where are the stays? Where are my stays? They're on the wrong box. I see them.
I really gotta reorganize my costume storage. Also, have I mentioned that I hate putting on corsets without a split busk? And I always forget to lace the very top eyelet, probably because I can't see it while I'm lacing. Luckily, the center front matched up perfectly. although I chose to lower the front neckline by about an inch. But that meant I had to adjust my outer pattern pieces to match. And since you've already seen me sit around and hand sew, let's make this front part quick.
I have attached the front panels, except I realized this only after I finished hand sewing all of this down. That the skirt comes out to here, but the zone front goes way back to the side seam. If I wanted the trim to continue from the skirt up across the zone, this point needs to match this point, and it's so far off. I don't want to just leave this front plain because you can barely tell with this print that there's even a line here. I am so over this stupid trim, and I haven't even gotten to that part yet.
So I took off the upper sections of the front bodice, ripping out all my teeny tiny hand stitches. It's sad, but it had to be done. I also trimmed off a bit of the skirt so I could make it match my new adjusted front panel, which I redrafted, cut out new pieces, and prepped for sewing again. And yes, this process is tedious and tiring for everyone involved. But once that was finished, I could start attaching the shoulders and assembling the sleeves. 18th century sleeves are inserted differently from modern sleeves. First, they're sewn along the underarm, but then the cap is left free to be fitted on the body. Since I can't fit sleeves on myself, I used the dress form. After a quick try on, I thought the sleeves looked fine, but we'll revisit those later. Now, at last, we've reached the fun part, or what ought to have been fun, but really turned out to be the most torturous: the trim. And I tested out multiple size options using scraps and pinned them on the dress form. Once I was satisfied, it was time to do the trim for real.
I've cut out all of these strips for the trimming to go all around the neck and skirt, but I have one little detail I have to contend with. So if you look at a lot of these original examples, the little ruffle that overhangs will be hemmed with a very tiny narrow hem on the inside. And they probably did that because fabric was so expensive that you wanted to save as much of it as possible. I have plenty of fabric, so I don't need to do that. But it would be more accurate if I did. For this part where the trim overhang is so narrow, I'm not going to bother with hemming it. I'm just going to fold it over because there's no point in trying to save extra fabric at all. But on this, am I about to hand hem 220 inches of trim for a detail that literally no one else will notice but me? Yes, I am. Ugh, why am I like this?
The trim required lots of math, lots of cutting, lots of gathering stitches, and took several hours to complete. And I tackled it one section at a time.
I've got the trim on the neckline and the center front, and I still need to do the sleeves and the skirt. I actually already finished hemming all of this very long trim. And I did that off camera because I took it downstairs and I just sewed and sewed and sewed until I was done. But now I need to attach it, so I need to iron the other edge and gather the whole strip all the way around.
As I was finishing up the trim, I decided I wasn't happy with the fit of the sleeve cap, so I took the shoulder strap off and repositioned the cap. I refit the sleeves on here and they're fitting a lot better. I pulled up the sleeve cap a lot more into the shoulder. I'm still getting a little bit of rolling, folding here, but I'm just gonna leave it. I think that's okay. So as a reference, this purple line right here, I drew from this pattern piece. So this is from my robe a l'anglaise, which I made a year and a half ago or something like that. The sleeve cap cuts in way more on both sides than the Scroop pattern one does. As you can see, this is a much wider sleeve cap. And that's why I think I'm getting that extra fold in my sleeve cap. But even with that extra little fold, I'm at least getting more range of motion out of this sleeve. Sometimes you don't want to overfit a garment. You gotta find a happy medium. I have so many emotions about this outfit. It took almost 4 months to complete, which is much longer than a normal costume would take me, mostly because life kept getting in the way, but in the end, I'm happy with the outcome. I'm glad I committed to doing the trim detail, even if it wasn't my original vision. And this exact trim style with the ruffle across the bodice at an angle like this, it may not be super accurate, at least when it comes to surviving garments, but a similar style appears often in fashion plates, although those images usually depict silk ensembles and typically polonaise jackets. But whatever, it's accurate enough for me. The pattern itself was easy to follow, and it only gave me trouble when I deviated from it. I'm wearing this with my red threaded stays, my American Duchess shoes, and those little accessories I made earlier, along with some new linen sleeve ruffles and a cap I sewed off camera. I still have a large chunk of the original duvet left, plus the 2 pillowcases, most of which has been colored, but maybe I can do something with it. The DFW Costumers Guild is hosting a black and white tea later this year, and I think this ensemble would work well for that event. Thanks for sticking around through this wild ride of a project. I hope life is treating you well and you feel inspired to create beautiful things. Let me know what you're currently working on in the comments, and until next time, happy sewing. I was inspired by a few extant 1770s Caraco+. Ugh!